if we have moments where we're just talking crap and we're not going to add, I will delete it, obviously.
We're talking crap.
Like, this is the beauty of editing magic.
Except we'll keep it in when it's really good.
Mm-hmm. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the introduction episode of our podcast, Dice Scrolls, where a D&D player and her DM discuss the experience of playing tabletop RPGs together. My name is Maxi, and I am the aforementioned Dungeon Master, as well as residential Warlock patron. And this is my co-host, player, and overseas Warlock, Navii.
Hello.
So, Navii, what is Dice Scrolls going to be about for the people listening?
So, we are going to look at various topics from a Dungeon Master and a player's perspective.
And why do you think these two different perspectives will add any value to topics that have really been done to death before?
Well, I believe because there's still people who struggle with, these topics. Maybe we can add, clarity.
Yeah, and also, when we, first decided to do this as an idea, and we're coming up with ideas of what should our podcast be about, there's lots of advice for DMs and how to run their game.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of advice for players and how to be a player in someone's game. There's rarely any advice where the two come together.
Yeah.
Where two people have taken on different sides of the argument. I say argument, a lot of it is just going to be a very friendly debate here in the podcast, where we just openly discuss things that we may have a difference on, things that we may not, and support each other with. But I will be speaking as a DM. Occasionally, I will talk as a player, just to add a bit of extra experience in whether or not it collaborates with Navii's.
Yeah.
But mostly, I am here to fulfill the role as a DM, talking about my personal experiences and what I've learned in my own dice scrolls, essentially. What I've learned about the topics that we are going to talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
Whereas you, Navii, are going to be talking about the player side of it.
Yeah.
And hopefully, together, it will inform both sides as well as entertain everyone.
Hopefully.
Originally, players might be interested to know that we were going to do the popular thing that a lot of people do, in that we were going to do a long time ago live recordings of our D&D games. And for a little while we did, but that game had to be dissolved for a number of reasons that we're probably going to mention every now and again, for this introduction.
Yeah.
But essentially there wasn't enough workable materials for us to do a podcast about, just a bunch of nerds playing D&D.
Right.
But who knows? Maybe in the future we'll have another crack at it. For the time being, we want to just focus about addressing an audience in a much more intimate manner, talking directly to one another and to people who might be interested in how to deal with the list of topics that, Navii, if you want to talk about right now.
Well, for starters, we have a lot of episodes lined up that might be relevant to a lot of players. So one of them's going to be anxiety at the table, which a lot of people deal with nowadays. Then
basically about how to deal with it when from the positions of a first-time player or a consistent player, because anxiety affects everyone, and not just from a player standpoint, which Navii will mostly have covered. I will have the DM part of this, where I talk about the DM experience and anxiety of just trying to keep a game rolling and hoping that everyone else is having fun, because that is a universal experience.
Yeah, and then for a player with anxiety, it's are you doing a good job of role playing? Is your character liked by the other players? Are you not a burden to the DM?
These are definitely things that we can talk about at great length when we get to this episode. We have a lot to say about the topic of anxiety at the table. After which, we're going to cover the next episode, which is the players themselves. What kind of players you might expect. The idea of, like, people who cause problems and disruptions around the table, whether or not the players get along with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, there's, when I first started, there was a case of players not really getting along, but it's not really an issue since that game is no longer played. But, like, the game I'm playing now is fine.
Yeah, we've got, like, a really good group of players.
We do.
And we will probably talk about them a fair bit because, like, Navii and I am Navi's main DM.
Yep.
And she's part of the main game that I run. And a lot of our experiences is going to be based on that game, or one of the one-shots that I've ran, or one of the old game that Navii just mentioned. And I'll occasionally bring in stories from other RPG experiences that I've had.
Yeah.
Just to make it more interesting.
Yeah, so there'll be a lot of when, like, Maxi was the player.
Yes, a long time ago.
Long time ago.
No, I'm still currently a player in, like, a number of games. And have a relatable amount of experience with other players.
Next up is the DM. So this basically means, like, is this the DM for you?
Yeah.
Or is it not?
Yeah, because what we want to encourage in this episode is that you're probably not going to like every person's running style, and that's okay. If you don't like the way someone runs games, and that seems to be like a you problem, that's like a preference that you have, you can just leave that table. Or if that person is a shit about, like, things that they have to say, or, like, are just encouraging an atmosphere that is bad and toxic around, like, the table, you again do not have to be in that game.
No.
You do not have to associate with that person.
And you shouldn't be guilted into being associated.
Yeah, you shouldn't be made to feel as though, like, you need to stick around for that game. Episode 4 will be, like, a bit bright and breezy. We've decided to call it Love is in the Air and How to Get Players Interested. This will be about romance in RPGs. Specifically, like, romance between PCs and PCs, or NPCs and PCs. And the players and DMs, like, personal opinions and comfort levels in relation to that. Because you should never force anything like that, even in a roleplay game, especially in a roleplay game.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just want to, like, fight and kill monsters and stuff, and that's valid. That's a perfectly fine experience. And other people want to have a romantic comedy of errors.
Like I do.
In which their characters can just be complete disasters.
Yep.
Yeah, you'd know a lot about that, wouldn't you, Navii?
I do. It's my favorite thing to play.
These poor boys that you've, like, put in this situation. Let's be clear, though, they enjoy the situation that they're in. Like, yes. I mean, Salamarco had no idea that you were interested in him, and, like, that never came to anything, because he didn't say anything to him, but, you've asked Semen Althasi out, and he was like, oh, okay.
And, like... I'll also, like, talk about, because the character we're referring to right now is my character, Amelie. She's a Twilight Elf, and she's a disaster, both in the love field and when it comes to interaction with people.
Yeah, which is a good segue into character concept changes.
Yeah. Number 5.
Number 5, the 5th episode.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we mean by character concept changes?
So what we mean is, like, this your first time building a character, and it's like, the flaws, the bonds, the personality, you have those set from, like, when you first make the character sheet. But, like, as you play the character, that's when, like, you start to change things, like, wait, no, this is how they would be.
Which is, like, a much more common experience than most people think.
Yeah.
A lot of people pen up and establish the idea of what their character is going to be like before they've actually had a chance to play them, and they'll find that whilst playing them, they completely transform before their eyes.
Yeah.
And it's... To be honest, it might be, like, one of the oddest experiences in terms of role-playing when you, like, start with an idea of what your character's like, and they change. They end up not being played how you expected, but you think it's right
Yeah.
It feels better to play them this way.
Yeah.
I have multiple experiences with this, and I'll probably have one very, very soon when one of my friends' long-running D&D games is about to end, and they're gonna start running a new one. So I've got like a cute new level 1 character waiting in the wings, ready to go. And he is probably going to be nothing like what I thought he was originally designed to be like.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So episode 6 then will transition into epic moments. These are the rule of cool, the time in which your character steps out of the shadows and does something that just makes you go, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
And often these come from completely out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's often the most spur-of-the-moment thing. From a DM standing, a lot of epic moments can be more planned when you've got a particular story development that you want to push. And you've been planning it for a while, and then you just narrate this incredible scene to your players of this thing happening. And indeed, my players recently have prevented me from being able to do that. Because they decided that we're not going to let the bad guy have even that slightest chance of doing anything remotely cool.
I mean, since I'm gonna admit it was me.
Yep, it was you.
It was me. Because I was gonna originally let it, slide, but I'm like, no. I let the other things that we did slide. I'm like, I'm not letting this happen.
To be fair, there's a lot of moments that you've ended up intervening with that have been honestly better than what I had planned.
Yeah.
Because you've actually, saved the lives of NPCs that I fully intended to kill. Including the boy that you're having a date with. He was a goner. And you just did not want him to die.
No.
Which is such a great thing to be discussing because episode 7 is going to be about death.
Yep.
Character death, specifically.
PCs and NPCs.
NPCs, PCs, yep. What to do about it. From DM standing, player standing. We'll give, maybe a little bit of a preview right now, because I think a lot of what we want to discuss is, sometimes it can be a really heavy and upsetting thing for your player character to die. Especially if you've spent a lot of time building this background that is gonna essentially come to nothing now.
Mm-hmm.
And that also, as a DM, causes the DM a few problems, because they've worked with the player on, where the backstory of this character will lead. And with that character gone, do they stop doing what they were going to do with the backstory? Does the backstory continue to unfold, but, now the relevant character is just missing from it? Mm-hmm. Is that just pieces for the rest of the party to pick up?
Yeah. I know, as a player, a lot of the times when, my Amelie goes down, or Meg goes down, I get really nervous, oh god, this is it. I'm gonna have to think of a new character, and I have nothing in the wing. Especially since I never want Amelie to go down, because a lot of Cyrus has part of her backstory in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we worked a lot on her backstory, and I'll be honest, because of recent events in the story, if Amelie was to die, not saying she will, I don't want her to, I'm not, this isn't a conspiracy against you, Navii, I swear, but if Amelie was to die at some point in the near future, I would still continue with Amelie's backstory, except, there wouldn't be the involvement of your character's brother or, his fiancé, except probably if the party decided to tell your brother that you were dead.
Oh god, that would break his poor little Sangramore heart.
I know. And also, I guess your boyfriend will stay in prison and die.
Yeah.
But the main villain of your arc will still continue to do what he wanted to do, and it would be, hopefully something that the party would be interested in stopping. And given the party's choices so far, I would say yes to that.
Yeah.
Also, I guess Beth's character would need to tell your character's parents that you were dead.
Oh no!
Yeah, it gets sadder and sadder the more you think about it, doesn't it?
Sad.
Just, like, so devastating.
Can you imagine how sad Sammy would be?
Like, Sammy would be sad in the, like, incredibly reserved, I must not cry way.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, probably feel guilt for the rest of his life. But there's a lot about your character's backstory that I honestly don't know. When we actually get to meet your character's family and stuff, if and when, I don't know how it's gonna be when I get in the zone and I just roll with it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if the way that we designed your character's family, you wanted that your character's dad to have, like, a level of redeemability about himself.
Yeah.
And that he wasn't, like, a total jerk.
No.
But there's a very good chance that the rest of the players and subsequent player characters will think very badly of your character's dad.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm prepared for that.
Yeah, like, that's kind of, like, realistic, though.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to be a downer here. So, what else did I want to say about character deaths very, very briefly? Oh, I know what I wanted to say. When it came to DMs who run meat grinders, be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're going into a game and the DM is holding a copy of the Tomb of Horrors, do not spend all night on your character's backstory. Your character is gonna die. Your next 8 characters are going to die.
Yeah.
Trust me. A long time ago, it used to be fine and also expected of D&D games to frequently kill player characters. That was a big point, a big part of the game. For, like, your character is squishy and will die.
Yeah.
So
like,
you have to be smart, you have to be careful. But as roleplay became more of a thing, a lot more people are less willing to see characters die.
Yeah. You're, like, playing 3rd edition or, like, either 4th or, like, lower. It's something you have to be prepared for. Because a lot of those monsters are heavy hitters.
They are. And also, like, if there is an expectation in a person's game that death is an option that the DM will not shield you from, be smart and equip your characters properly.
Yeah.
If you've got the option to buy a ton of healing potions, buy a ton of healing potions. Especially if you know the DM is not going to pull any punches with you.
Yeah. Or if you're looking for, you know, best armor. If you get the highest armor class, and it says the only downside is you don't get sneak proficiency, that's fine. If you're in a meat grinder, you won't be sneaking. So you can clang and jingle all you want in that fancy armor.
You can just run in and declare battle with the first dragon you see heroically.
Yeah.
So like I said, roleplay became a very big thing about changing the way people saw character deaths in D&D, which is what episode 8 is going to be about. The roleplay aspect.
Yay.
How would you tackle roleplay as a player, Navii?
Well, like, say, role-playing with the DM, or, like, say, with an NPC. It's more of willing, in, like, a fantasy aspect, interact with this character, and, like, be your character as you would think.
Yeah. Also, it's important to mention that, in roleplay, you are not your character.
No.
You can make decisions as a character that you normally wouldn't make as a player, and that actually might be incredibly hard for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And often, the person who has to do that the most is the DM.
Yeah.
The DM has to fill an entire world full of various different characters and creatures who have all these motivations, things that they care about, behaviors and personalities, which the DM has no experience with on a personal level.
Like, if as a PC, you're gonna be like, say, good evil, lawful evil, chaotic evil.
Mm-hmm.
Just roleplay it. Say, you know, you're in this party, not because you choose to be in this party with all these good aligned characters.
Yeah.
But because you're captured and being brought somewhere.
There are really, really good ways to roleplay, like, why a person of a certain alignment would associate with a bunch of people of a completely different alignment. And also, as multifaceted creatures, you don't always need to follow your alignment so strictly.
No.
There might be certain aspects and, like, life experiences that your character will have had that may, like, influence choices that they've made.
Mm-hmm.
Or will make.
Like,
maybe, like, a good example of that would be, like, I was actually in a Pathfinder game where we all got gathered together, and it was like, we all weren't brought into it together at the same time. The DM had to do a lot of busy work because we were in the middle of the entire city being invaded, and therefore had to jump from each different character who was in, like, a completely different situation, and they all basically ended up in the middle and fought the same boss monster to get out of the city together.
Yeah.
And one of the characters was an assassin who had been in the city to kill a mark that she had. And the invasion happened, and she had to get out. And she jumps down off a rooftop and drives her daggers, epic moment style, into the big monstrosity that is blocking our way, for no other reason other than the fact that it was blocking her way too. And she basically saw that we were the best option that she had to get out of there. But what ended up happening narratively was that the psionic of our group was kind to her. She was an evil-aligned character, and he was kind to her, and he saved her life. And that prompted her to remain with the group.
Yeah.
Because she was like, I owe this person a life debt now, and I'm having weird feelings because no one's ever just done something for me because, like, they didn't want anything.
No.
Like, so a lot of then her presence in the party, which was, like, very good. She was a really quiet, stoic character who kept making, like, snarky remarks every now and again and didn't seem to gel with anyone. But often whenever the psionic, like, spoke reasonably or diplomatically, she shut up and listened.
Mm-hmm.
And she would sometimes debate with him about, like, his sense of morality and things. And a lot of it was, like, her trying to understand, like, sticking your neck out for a total stranger. Unfortunately, that game had to end, and it had to end at, like, the psionic getting kidnapped. And her, like, swearing bloody vengeance into the sky that she will hunt down the people who took him and, like, save him. Thereby, like, we thought at the time that, like, okay, this would be the honor of her life debt. And she's like, oh, I'd completely forgotten that, like, I owe the psionic a life debt. He's just my friend now.
Aww.
And it was just, like, a really good, like, role play for that character.
Yeah.
Super fun character she was.
So, like, roleplay and become, like, an anti-hero.
Be the character that you want to see in the world, or that you don't want to see in the world.
Yeah.
Take a different perspective, or just take an aspect of your own personality that you want to explore in a fantasy setting.
Yeah. Like, a lot of my characters have a thing to mouth off to authority.
Yeah.
And that's something I would never do, mostly because, you know, I have anxiety and I'm an introvert.
Yeah, to, like, tie in what you just said with the very first episode that we want to do, often you will ask me outside of session if a decision that you made in character that was spur of the moment was okay because you worry.
Yes.
And I'm like, it's absolutely fine. So that takes us on to episode 9, lycanthropy and vampirism. So, this is an odd one, lycanthropy and vampirism. Remind me why we wanted to discuss this in relation to a player versus DM style of podcast discussion.
Well, I remember you telling me a story about how this person wanted you to make werewolves this certain way, and, like, and how, you know, you're not really comfortable with that. You'd rather make werewolves either the original way or, like, one that's more balanced, question mark.
I think the discussion that we had was that I was having anxiety over designing specific kinds of theranosphopes.
Yes.
Which were based on other cultures' interpretations of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I, like, didn't want this to be reflective of, like, stereotypical opinions.
No.
And I was quite worried about that.
Yes.
But I also, like, did my research and talked to people who are of the aforementioned, like, cultural backgrounds that I wanted to, like, do, were creatures for.
Yep.
And I think I have, like, a more of an informed understanding of, like, how to do it. And also, mechanically speaking, werewolves and vampires, when dealing with a player character becoming one of those things, there is a vast power imbalance.
Yes.
Basically, where creatures don't scale very well. And vampires, if you end up getting bitten as a character, you either have a choice of becoming a vampire, which is CR7 creature, I believe. I'd have to check that up in the monster manual. Or you could be a vampire spawn, which is only CR2.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's treated as though you are like a mindless extension of the actual vampire. And I'm like, you should be able to design your own.
Yeah.
In an effective way which, like, blends with the gameplay. But also in a way that doesn't make it so that everyone wants to be a were creature or a vampire because of the powerful benefits that they get. That is a huge problem with the different kinds of players that we're going to discuss in one of the earlier episodes, because you'll have players who care a lot about being the most powerful and, like, going heavy into the mechanics and stuff and wanting to build their character. So they'll naturally demand that narratively you set up them becoming a were creature or a vampire if you've, like, showed them your homebrew. And they're like, this looks really, really cool, so, like, I want to do that. And if, like, you as a DM weren't going to involve were creatures and vampires in your setting, it, like, kind of puts you in a bit of a sticky corner.
Yeah.
You're also subjecting players if you decide to just go, hey, I want everyone in this party to be bitten by a different were creature. And you're expecting, like, players to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Because, not all players are super down to be a creature that, like, that they can't control. Often, me as a DM, I like it if there is a downside to becoming a were creature or a vampire.
Yeah, there should
Enough so that, like, the
down.
player characters take time to see this downside before they decide to still want to become that. And also, I was always really, really scared of were creatures, like, growing up, and I always thought it was, like, a terrifying thing to happen to your body.
Yeah.
But some people just like that. Some people are into it. I won't understand it, but I will support it. And provide them with stats of lycanthropy if they want it.
The thing is, I prefer lycanthropy in, like, RPG games or setting. Like, when I played Skyrim, I preferred lycanthropy over vampirism. Because when you were a werewolf, you were, like, it was easier to control than the vampire lord, which I really struggled with. In, like,
yeah, no, that's a completely valid thing.
Yeah. Though, if we're getting into, like, lore-wise, I prefer vampires.
Well, I mean, lore-wise for my setting, lycanthropy and vampirism in the setting. There are factions, there's a faction of humans, demi-humans, known as the Sangramore. And they are a long-lived species of descendants of the ancient humans of Syra who drink magic that is suffused in the lifeblood of all creatures of the world to sustain themselves, essentially. They have, like, a sunlight sensitivity, but they don't, like, burn horribly in sunlight.
Right.
They depend on blood. They live a very long time, like 500 years. They have, like, resistances to necrotic damage, to basically death itself. And certain members of their society, of their people, a long time ago, basically created the first vampires. But the word vampire doesn't exist in the setting except to mean a different thing. Instead, these creatures were called the Mortisang, which means the dead-blooded. And for a while, no one really knew what to do with them. They were functionally like normal vampires. And they were essentially used as a slave labor force by their creators and have rebelled a number of times, and currently in the setting, they are in the middle of a civil war against their creators. A brutal one that's been going on for the past 50 years. And it doesn't look as though it's going to end anytime soon, despite the fact that a lot of Sangremois people are very, very tired, but the Emperor is determined to continue the war effort.
Yeah.
And the Mortisang have banded together under a new name, which they call themselves vampires, which actually means rebels in the setting. And it's a word which is banned across the dynasty because we're like, you shouldn't acknowledge what they call themselves because like that is essentially an act of treason in of itself.
Yeah.
They are called Mortisang rebels. Don't call them vampires. That's acknowledging that they have a legitimacy to their rebellion, and they don't. But they actually do.
They do.
They just don't want to be slaves.
No.
In contrast, were-creatures, in a lot of places, theranthropy, like lycanthropy, is less of a curse and more of a gift, depending on where you are. And in the continent that you guys currently are in Athroya, in the southlands of Athroya, you're going to meet some were-lions and were-badgers.
Because
and
Maxi's bitter still about Oblivion.
Yeah, I'm very, very bitter about the fact that Cyrodiil has no fucking were-lions in it, despite the fact that that is the place that were-lions are supposed to be from.
Yep.
In any case, were-lions and were-badgers are a thing that the Genasi tribes of the south of Athroya choose to take on themselves.
Yeah.
Because, like, they see these animal forms as proud protectors. Mm-hmm. And they will, like, adopt these forms to defend their tribes and their clans from harmful creatures like the hyena-like gnolls, who are like a seriously bad problem in that region, and like dust devils and things like that. There are all kinds of weird monsters that lurk around the savannah and stuff, and the tribes have to protect themselves, keep themselves safe and stuff, and protect the young ones. Yeah. So that is why, like lycanthropy, or rather, like, becoming a were-creature is considered not just a gift, but a responsibility, an honor, a privilege. Mm-hmm. And failing to use this privilege to protect your tribe, to protect your pride, is, like, an act of sacrilege.
It's dishonor.
Yeah, it's like becoming a were-creature to just, like, murder and attack other people is, like, one of the worst things that you can do.
Yeah. So,
but anyway, I think we've talked about that a while now.
Yeah, but also to go back to roleplay about this, your character can be scared to be either one of these, and for, like, vampirism, you don't have to be the traditional vampire.
You don't.
You can be Blade if you want.
Yeah.
You can be a Daywalker. Because a lot of these things need a thought process. That's number 10.
Clever segue.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so thought process. This will be an involved episode, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Often the way that you think something is going might not be how other people around your table think that it's going. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but on a roleplay level, DMs constantly have this thought process of, okay, the players have decided to do this thing. What is the consequences of those actions? And the DM has to go away and, like, have a thought process about, like, so what's going to happen here? And then has to set up what they believe should happen.
Right.
Likewise, with players, a common thought process will be planning and trying to piece together clues that the DM has made.
Like I pieced together clues.
Yes, like you pieced together the clues.
And I'm not the detective in the group.
Unfortunately, the detective was away sick that night.
Yeah.
So episode 11 is something that, like, I'm particularly interested in. It's, we've titled it The Anime Protagonist Syndrome.
Yep, and it's titled that way because sometimes, as players, we think we should be the leader and the most important aspect of a group. In, like, anime, where you have that main character, they're suddenly invincible and, like, oh my god, amazing.
And unfortunately, that doesn't always pan out.
No.
Sometimes it's a DM's job to either take players down a peg, or make players feel like they are anime protagonists and they should feel good about themselves and like what they're doing is pretty epic.
Yeah.
And it's finding that balance, I believe. In some cases, it's a bad thing if anime protagonist syndrome takes over a player's desire to forward everything themselves.
Yeah.
And almost gives the rest of the party no input whatsoever.
No.
And I'm like, this is no longer a cooperative game. This is just the DM and this one player going back and forth, and the DM is getting increasingly tired.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a thing that happened in the old game that we had to stop, wasn't it, Navii?
Yeah.
We're not going to mention any names,
No.
obviously. But it was ultimately what caused the collapse of that previous game, because there was nowhere that we could go narratively that would allow us to help the others branch out more.
No.
And because of how much this particular player had taken over the game, it no longer felt fun.
No.
When a game no longer feels fun because of anime protagonist syndrome, you have a very small window of gaining control of your D&D game again. And often in doing that, you will upset the player in question.
Yeah.
A good example, actually, was in my friend's game of Feng Shui. I think it's called that. It's a game where you're like Hollywood protagonists.
Hollywood protagonists?
Yeah, and it's set in our world. And one of the players, completely of their own accord, decided that the main villain of this particular story arc was their dad. So that they could have, like, a cool set-up narrative of daughter and father versus one another and stuff. And apparently from my friend who told me the story, she didn't actually clear that with the DM at all.
Oh, no.
This was something that, like, she had decided to do. And my friend, when they finally encountered the villain, and she was, like, about to launch into her father, it's me moment, my friend's character shot her dad between the eyes.
Oh my god.
The minute, like, he walked through into that room. And this completely devastated her, and she never played with my friend again in any D&D capacity.
Right.
So, when it comes to anime protagonist syndrome, that is the sort of thing that you want to avoid, maybe.
Yeah. I think in Cyrus, before Zemen was gonna be killed, I think I almost went into it.
I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with going into it, because, like, sometimes that leads back into episode 6 epic moments.
That is true.
It's when you're doing it and overshadowing everyone else's achievements, or, like, taking over the session way too much.
That also leads back to number 1, which is anxiety.
Yeah. So, number 12 is going to be called Abracadabra, which spells the best for you. This is perhaps going to be our most resource-heavy episode.
Right.
Where we just are going to crack open the player's handbook and any, like, other materials, like Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Look over spells and stuff and discuss, like, customizing your character builds with them.
Yeah. So, like, I think maybe for this, I'll focus more on Warlock.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, my contribution as a DM would be, like, in homebrewing spells.
Yeah.
Which is something that I sometimes do for the setting, and it's something that you always ask me about, and I need to compile the list, to be honest, Navii, because, like, I usually have very good bookkeeping on stuff, but when it comes to spells, there are so many homebrewed materials that I've got that I haven't actually, like, put them all together on one thing. But one day, when I have finished world building, which will never happen, but when I am, like, at a point in which I've liked how much I've done about world building, I will finally do this.
Right. And, like, this is a very big topic for me, because I honestly don't know what spells are best for me or my character.
I suppose, like, a good thing as well as a DM would be magic items in this regard, too.
Yes.
Because that still falls under which spells are best for you, when, like, you could, as a DM, help players save spell slots for other things that they want to do by providing them with magic items which serve a function.
Right.
That they could just use instead.
Mm-hmm. That's why I have the ring that shoots basically an Eldritch blast, so if I want to get rid of it, I can get rid of that incantation and choose another.
Or like, a lot of people end up having magical items which have a very utility-focused purpose.
Right.
Because utility-based spells are very, very good and very helpful. But in D&D, you end up in a lot of combat. And utility-based spells are useless to you in combat.
Yeah.
Unless you can use them very, very cleverly, in which case I've seen a few times that they have been. You'll mostly want to be spec'd in spells which do a lot of damage for combat. But you only have a limited number of spell slots, so what about all the cool utility spells that you could be doing outside of combat that you now have no room for?
Like all those nifty cat trips.
All of the precious spells that you could be doing. A good example of this is that I've recently leveled up in Beth's Ancient Two Earth game. Where I play a human druid called Dagny. And I've got my first 4th level spell. And not only that, but because I got to level up, I then got to change my spell loadout.
Right.
So I chose spells which were very in character for Dagny. For her first 4th level spell, I've gone with Giant Insect.
Oh my gosh.
It is nowhere near the best 4th level spell I could have taken as a druid. But it is the most thematically appropriate one to Dagny, because she is an insect druid.
Right.
She has, like, a family of beetles which live in her knapsack, and one little scarab beetle called Terry 2, which, like, lives on her head.
What happened to
in a
Terry
little
1?
nest. Terry 1 is a human warlock.
Oh.
And Terry 2 was named to mock him, but also, like, is a valid boy that she loves very much.
Okay.
And who she's often seen, like, speaking with in, like, insect chittering. And, well, because I got to redo my spell loadout, I chose a spell called Skywrite.
Oh.
So, Skywrite is literally what you think it is. You can make the clouds form, I think it's between 10 and 15 words in the air that, like, people can see from miles around.
Yeah.
This is a useless spell in terms of combat. It is, however, a hilarious spell if you're a bad-tempered druid who holds grudges against everyone. And wants to publicly shame them in some capacity just because they've made a slight insult against you.
Right.
And that is why I chose Skywrite, because Dagny wants to have that option to, if anyone makes her mad, she writes mean things in the sky that last 24 hours.
I love it.
She'll also, like, probably write really confusing things, maybe keep a shopping list up there or something, for, like, self-reference. And that brings us to the final episode. And by final episode, the episode that we have got so far to.
Yep.
Because we are both interested in more topics in the future. But we've written down 13 episodes so far of, like, what we want to discuss in the 13th episode. We've titled The Great Escape, Planning and Execution. This is about, as a DM, trapping and imprisoning your players. And what to do about it if your players don't want to be trapped. Or, narratively, there is a very, very good reason as to why you need to imprison or trap your players. But maybe they've got very cool abilities that would prevent that from happening, and you have to do a lot of bullshit to make sure that it still happens. But also, maybe you end up with upset players at the end of the day who are just like, you shouldn't have been able to do that, and I didn't really like feeling as though I couldn't do anything to stop you. So, what as a player would you want to talk about in relation to The Great Escape?
Planning, for one, and, like, if you're not okay with it, talk to your DM afterward.
And also escape.
Yes, and escape.
A player should be given the chance to escape.
Yes.
And a player, that's why it's important to have, like, planning and execution, so that you can, like, plan to get out of there. And execution is a bit of, like, a double-barreled word, because, like, sometimes you might want to put your players on a chopping block, and they've got to get away from that.
But, like, this also goes back to players. You know, you gotta have been able to work with your fellow players in order to escape. You guys gotta come up with a plan together and execute it.
It's a bit of an odd one, this particular topic, just because of, it seems like a standard thing that you would expect in D&D, for your players to end up captured, imprisoned, or in some capacity, detained.
Yeah.
And yet, it's one of the major things that a lot of players don't like.
No.
A good example, I think, is in the Tomb of Annihilation, where one of the things that you can do to get into the Yuan-ti temple is to declare yourself as slaves.
Yeah.
And be, like, bound in chains and stripped of your weapons to get into the Yuan-ti temple, thinking that, like, oh, they're slaves. And I'm like, I've not personally read the module. I'm sure, like, it goes into better detail about, like, how then your players are supposed to get their weapons back and then escape being, like, mind control converted into, like, willing slaves. But it's still, like, why is that the option for you to get into a temple?
I don't know.
And why do you expect, like, everyone to be on board with that?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, like, I think any player or DM should not be on board with that.
No.
Like, why is that plan A? Let's pretend to all be slaves.
Yeah. What's plan B?
I'm gonna look into the Tomb of Annihilation module for this episode, but a lot of what I'm talking about in reference to was a video by Puffin Forest.
I know what video you're talking about.
It's called D&D Story. Whoops, guess everyone has to die now. So if you, like, want just an entertaining 12-minute skit about exactly what we're talking about and what we're making reference to, go check that out. Yeah. It's really good. So, yeah, I think that we've talked about everything that is immediately upcoming with the podcast. We'll be planning future episodes from number 13. We are definitely not going to stop at 13.
No.
We want to carry this on, because this is an idea that we've had for a very long time, and it seems like a lot of fun.
We're gonna carry this on till we're 2 old women in a retiring home.
Yes, with our own little sound booth. Like, let's talk about D&D 9th edition. Do you think we'll get to 9th edition?
I hope so.
You know what, we should also, like, D&D will be the main thing that we talk about on this podcast.
Right.
But we should, to, like, branch ourselves out at some point, play games of other systems.
We should.
Because I, as a DM, experienced in playing specifically D&D games.
Right.
Mostly 5e, but I can run games of older editions and have done.
Yeah.
And Navii, D&D 5th edition is the only one that you played, but you did play a Pathfinder game once.
Yeah.
And, which was fine, I thought.
It was fine, I was just confused.
Yeah, like, Pathfinder was really heavy as a game, and there's lots of different rules, and it keeps getting expanded on to the point where they've just finally decided to do 2nd edition Pathfinder.
Jesus Christ.
And I hear it's not great.
No.
In any case, there are lots of different RPGs that I've played but never ran, and that Navii has never played in at all.
No.
So I should, for all you listeners, like, do that as an experiment sometimes, of, like, try a different system. I've actually always wanted to run Changeling the Lost. There's also, like, running Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Which, I would be down with running. I've played it a few times, and depending on who DMs it, I think, will depend on, like, how good that game is. Because, like, I've seen some very, very good Cthulhu games, and then, like, other times, I've barely been able to get into it.
The only Call of Cthulhu I know of is that bad PlayStation game.
There's also, like, a game you might be interested in, Navii, called, there's a game, well, like, we're both World of Warcraft fans, so there is, like, literally an RPG about World of Warcraft.
Nice!
So we could just, like, make characters in that, and we both know Azeroth.
We do.
we know where to go.
Yeah.
We know how to set this up. We could even, like, design a game of, like, what we wanted to have happened in recent patches.
Oh my god.
Those of you who are like listening to this podcast, see when it's data marked and consider what recently came out patch-wise in World of Warcraft. And you might know what it is that we're talking about. If not, I will go into epic amounts of detail on a later podcast at your request.
Yeah.
And also not at your request, because I like talking about World of Warcraft.
If you want Maxi to talk about World of Warcraft, press 1.
If you don't want Maxi to talk about World of Warcraft, go away.
And if you guys have any suggestions on like something you personally want to hear about, you can always, if you're interested in the podcast too, just, put in submit an idea, like a little explanation.
Yeah, if you want to offer your opinions, ideas, topics that you want to see us tackle as a DM versus player perspective, then you can add them in the comment section of the YouTube video.
Yeah.
Or wherever we decide to upload this.
Twitter.
Also, be sure to check out, the description, where we'll have our Twitter links.
Yep.
And you can message us or follow us directly and send your suggestions there.
Yeah.
I hope that, having heard what we have available, would like to see what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And want to listen along with all of these topics and how we tackle them.
Mm-hmm. I hope these ideas catch your interest and that we, as the host and co-host of this podcast, catch your interest too.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what we want to talk about, as well as just getting heavy with explanations, is talking about entertaining stories from our own D&D experiences.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not super interested in what we have to say of how to deal with the particular things that we're talking about in topic and just want to hear funny D&D stories that we have available, listen to us for that as well.
We got you covered. I have a lot of epic moments to share, especially number one that is very much Maxi's favorite.
Honestly, the epic moments episode is probably going to be Navii does most of the talking and Maxi just goes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It was cool.
And so that's it. This has been the introduction episode of Dice Scrolls. Thank you very much for listening. My name, as before, is Maxi.
My name is Navii.
And we'll hope you'll continue listening and follow along. But until next time, bye!
Bye!